Good morning, and welcome to Thirsty Thursdays with She. Today we are going to be talking about Nehemiah, and we're going to be talking about rebuilding, whatever that looks like in your life, and we will also be introducing Shalom and his daughters in Nehemiah chapter 3. We'll get there in just a little bit. In order to for you to understand, and once we get to chapter 3, which talks about Shalom and his daughters, I want to give you a little bit of history about the Book of Nehemiah, the first couple of chapters, so that way you understand the setting and a little bit of why Nehemiah is doing what he is doing. So Nehemiah at this time is a cupbearer for King, believe it or not, King Xerxes. And if you ladies have followed my Esther study, we know King Xerxes from the Book of Esther. Well, this is the same king, but this is before the time of Esther. So right now, King Xerxes he's not married to Esther. There is a queen that is mentioned in chapter 1, but a lot of scholars believe that it was Queen Vashti. So this was before the time of Esther, but this is the same king, King Xerxes. And remember, that was in the Persian Empire. So the book of Nehemiah takes place. The Jews have been in exile. They've been in exile out of Jerusalem. The temple has been torn down. A lot of their walls have been burnt to the ground. So there's a lot of rebuilding that has to take place in Jerusalem for it to be what it was before it got ambushed and taken down. So another thing I want to bring to your attention is that Nehemiah, he's the cupbearer for King Xerxes. I already said that. And in chapter 1, we see that Nehemiah prays to the Lord. There's a really, really long prayer where he is just sad and burdened for his home, which is Jerusalem. And he cries out to the Lord. He's grieving. He's praying. It says that he mourned for a number of days. He fasted. He prayed. And I've been really into praying and fasting lately because some things only change and happen through prayer and fasting. So here we see Nehemiah, he's crying out to the Lord. He's lamenting, he's praying, he's fasting. He's asking for the Lord to do something about them being exiled, to do something about them going back to their homeland. So then in chapter 2, it takes place where, he's in this position where he's the cupbearer and he brings the wine to the king. And how about that? He is a cupbearer to the king. So he's really close to the king. And the king notices that he's sad. And he's like, why are you sad, Nehemiah? What is the problem? And so that opens up the door for Nehemiah to tell him, well, my king, if I want to share with you, this is what's been happening. I'm sad. Will you let me go back to my city? Will you let me go rebuild my city? And guess what? The king grants him that favor. So in chapter 1, he was praying and fasting, right? For God to move, for God to do something. In chapter 2, here we see the answer to his prayer. The king tells him, yes, you can go do that. And then Nehemiah has him write like letters of protection, because there's so many people that wanted to kill the Jews. So he makes sure that he has a protection from the king sealed. Also in chapter 2, after Nehemiah arrives in Jerusalem, in chapter 2, how many can relate to this? We always get ahead, right? We feel like, oh, God, you've answered our prayer. Yes, amen. And then all of a sudden, boom, the enemy comes. Chapter 2, verse 19, we get introduced to Sanballat, and he was an Ammonite. He was an official in the army. And he was very angry, very, very angry that Nehemiah had permission to rebuild Jerusalem. And so he mocked. It says, my Bible says he mocked and he despised Nehemiah. How many of us know that the enemy comes against us. Like even today, even this morning before me getting on here and doing this, I literally fought with the enemy in my mind because I was like, all these things kept coming up and I was like, Lord, I know that you've given me this word to share. Help me and don't let me get caught up in things that don't matter. So Sanballat he mocked and despised Nehemiah and anybody that was helping him rebuild. He even questioned him. What is this that you're doing? Are you rebelling against the king? Isn't that just like the enemy? He wants to make us question ourselves, question what we're doing. And then it says in verse 20, Nehemiah gave him this reply: the God of the heavens is the one who will grant us success. We, his servants, will start building, but you have no share, right, or historic claim in Jerusalem. So here he defeats the enemy with the truth. The truth is that they had historic claim to Jerusalem. They were Jews. So that was the truth. And God was going to give them favor. God was going to make that happen. The rebuilding of Jerusalem, he was going to make happen. God will give you the strength to rebuild. When you feel like, I don't know how I can do this. I don't know, this situation looks hopeless, Lord. Like I'm sure when Nehemiah showed up to Jerusalem and he saw the walls burnt, literally down to the ground, the stones, ashes, I'm sure that was very discouraging for him. Man, this is going to take us longer than I told the king it was going to take me. I don't know if we could do this. Who is going to come alongside me? Like all these questions in his head and his mind. But you know what? God will give you the strength to rebuild what looks hopeless, what looks like man telling you or the enemy taunting you, it can't be done. He mocks us. He makes us regret, or he fills our mind with confusion. God will give us the strength to rebuild, and he will put people alongside of you who will lock arms, who will lift you up, who will help you through that time to rebuild what looks hopeless. Hold fast. So in chapter 3, we see that the rebuilding begins, and Nehemiah starts listing out all these families that came to Jerusalem to help him rebuild. There's like a north gate, south gate, and chapter 3 is pretty much mentioning all these families that have helped in or are taking place in the rebuilding. And what is so beautiful about this, which I had studied this back in February and I revisited it because I was like, hold on, let me go back here. This was so good. At the end of chapter 3, it's verse 12. There's a mentioning, Nehemiah mentions a family, and the family's name is Shalom. That's the dad. That's his name. Son of Halahesh, ruler of half of the district of Jerusalem. So we know that he was a ruler in Jerusalem. He made repairs. So that means he was sent to repair a specific part of the wall. And then guess what it says after that? He and his daughters. Now, if you read the beginning of chapter 3, you know that it's all men. It's mentioning all men. And then at the end of verse 12, it says, beside him, Shalom, son of Hashalesh, ruler of half of the district of Jerusalem, made repairs, he and his daughters. Now, I researched that a little bit because that's the only time that women are mentioned in rebuilding the wall, like physically rebuilding the wall. It is believed that he did not have any boys, so any men. So he had his daughters. So his daughters locked arms with their father and said, you know what? We're going to help rebuild this. We're going to help restore our heritage. And I just found that to be so beautiful that his daughters worked hard to rebuild Jerusalem because they really understood what was valuable to them. And I'm asking you today, what is valuable to you that you would say to yourself, how can I lock arms with somebody or something and say, this is valuable enough, that you care about it. I'm going to come alongside of you to help you rebuild this. What looks like a hopeless situation, a burnt down situation. And I find so interesting that they use those pieces, the stones that were burnt, they used them to rebuild those walls. So those very same things that we go through in life, those very hurts and pains and ugly situations, those stones that we think they're of no use, God will take those beautiful pieces and he will use them to rebuild our lives back up. Those beautiful situations that we think, man, that was painful to get through. I really felt like I walked through the fire. I really felt like I was cinched. I got burnt. I don't know how I can make it through. And the God of the universe will take those very same things, because he says, daughter, these are valuable. These are valuable things. And he will use them to rebuild our lives or somebody else's life. And I just found such beauty in that. And another thing that I wanted to point out about Shalom's daughters is that they had to come together. These girls had to come together. And I want to focus on that word together for a little bit. If you keep on reading in chapter 3, you know that a lot of the workers, there was rumors of this enemy that we had read about. His name was Sanballat. He had threatened to come and kill them, or he tormented them. He tormented them. So people, while they were rebuilding the walls, they were armed with swords. They were armed with axes. They were armed with all these weapons as they were rebuilding. So can you imagine, you have to pick up these stones, rebuild, you're rebuilding. These women are rebuilding the wall with a sword. And then one would keep guard. Another woman would keep guard. She was protecting. She was making sure that no enemy was going to come to destroy what they were trying to rebuild. And if we look at that in the spiritual, when we lock arms with somebody, when we lock arms with a woman that we want to rebuild, that we want to come alongside and help and pray for and love on and nurture, that's kind of like what we are. We're standing there with our weapons. We're standing there with our word, the word of God. We're protecting them as they rebuild their life. We're beside them. We're helping them. And I just thought that was so beautiful. A few things about Shalom's daughters. So they helped rebuild the wall. They knew it was important. It mattered to them. How many daughters he had, it's never really mentioned in the Bible. The fact that his daughters were mentioned in the Bible as joining in and rebuilding of the wall was not common, because women did not do, that was not their job. They didn't have really physical labor. They would have been cooking, making dresses, making sure that they had linen, stuff like that. So this is a big deal that Shalom's daughters got involved in rebuilding the wall. This is big. God has destined for us to work together to help each other out. They knew that together they had to come and rebuild this wall. It was necessary. They also understood the covenant that God had made with them. And I can just imagine in me, if I had to rebuild a brick wall or something, I would be tired, stinky, sweaty. But then I would also feel, honored that I was chosen to be a part of that God would choose, that I would be willing. I'm like, whatever it takes for me to help of this rebuilding, I want to be a part. So much also that they get mentioned, that Nehemiah makes sure that he mentions them in the scriptures. So that word together, I want to mention, there's power in many. And there's a sense of oneness. So I can imagine these sisters saying, you know what, if we do it all together, we're going to see a sense of accomplishment. We're going to see something happening. There's a sense of one. They had to come in one mind, one accord. Also, they understood that it was really valuable to rebuild Jerusalem. And I had asked you earlier, what is valuable to you? What is valuable to you? Understanding what is valuable to you is a game changer. Why? Because it redirects, right? It redirects our focus and energy to those things that we're willing to help rebuild. Maybe it's a friend, maybe it's a friendship, maybe it's a family matter. Sometimes we think, man, that's been torn down. The enemy stole that from you. Or what has he stole from you? Is it joy, peace, trust? Maybe join with somebody together so they can help you rebuild. And you lock arms with one another, right? With your sisters, with women who will help you, who are committed to seeing you win. We need to be committed. We need to be women who are committed to one another, where we're cheering one another on. We want to see our sister win. We want to see them succeed. We want to see them rise above that stigma. We want to see them rise above their problem, right? And I talked about their weapons. And then also in chapter 4, if we continue on into the story, again, Sanballat was still tormenting them. He mocked them. He was furious. And then in verse 9, we see that Nehemiah prayed. He prayed against the enemy. He prayed and stationed people day and night to be watchful of their enemies. And then I love this verse. In verse 13, it says, I stationed them by families with their swords, spears, and bows. So I want to leave this Thirsty Thursday with, who are you going to be stationed with? Who are you going to lock arms with that family? And you're going to be their sword, their spear, and their bow. Who? So I hope that you've enjoyed this little nugget from Nehemiah. I know I love it. Every time I read this story, I find something new. So who are you going to lift up? Who are you going to rebuild? All right. Thank you, ladies.